And welcome to Chapter 6. Yay! In Chapter 6, we're going to talk a little bit about government intervention in the marketplace. Going back to the 10 principles, remember that we've said that the market is the best way is to organize economic activity. Now what we're going to see is the government intervening in that market. One of the byproducts of that is that we can no longer get to quantity equilibrium. So that means economists would say this market is no longer efficient. So anytime we see government intervention, which will inhibit, in this case, we will call it a binding price floor or a binding price ceiling, and taxes always do prevent us getting from quantity equilibrium. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you and let's jump into it. Okay. Of course, I didn't cue it up quite right. That's all right. It is what it is, right? Okay, so here we go. Chapter 6, and we're going to take a look at a price ceiling. I want you to think of a ceiling and perhaps the price being a ball in the ceiling. If you throw a ball up against the ceiling, it hits the ceiling and bounces off of it. And that's essentially what happens here when the government intervenes and creates a price ceiling. So these are under the auspices of price controls. And one of the things we know is it can generate inequities in the market. We're then going to turn our sights in later objectives in this chapter to talk about taxes. So let's go ahead and talk about our first government intervention, a price ceiling. A good example of a price ceiling would be rent control laws. So that is an example. And this is a legal minimum on which the price of goods can be sold at, okay? So the first thing we want to talk about is the idea of a binding versus non-binding. Something is non-binding if it does not inhibit the price. Okay, so we're going to look at that in just a moment, but no effect on the price or quantity sold. If it's binding, then what happens is the inequity becomes a shortage. So let me go ahead and show you just a real rough example here. If here's quantity and here's price. We have a downward sloping demand curve illustrating the buyers in the market and an upward sloping supply curve. Again, most important point to find these days is going to be price equilibrium and quantity equilibrium. So right here, our price equilibrium would be where quantity demanded and quantity supplied are the same, and we find those 2 points. Now, let's just say that the price here is $5, okay? And the quantity, I'll just put 1,000. I just want some numbers to refer to as I explain this, might make it a little simpler. Now, if the government comes in, and I'll use the government in terms of blue, and puts in a price ceiling, that means prices cannot go above it. So let's say that the government enacts a price ceiling at $10. That means the prices cannot go above $10 for this product. Right now, the price in the market is $5. That has no impact on this market whatsoever. So this would be non-binding. We would still end up at a price of $5 and we'd still have 1,000 as our quantity. Now let's go ahead and show an example of a binding price ceiling. A binding price ceiling is where the price ceiling is actually going to be below our quantity and price equilibrium. So again, I just kind of want to go back and redraw this just to make sure that it's clear. I'll just go ahead and use that one because that's the color I had up. Price equilibrium and quantity equilibrium. Again, I'm going to set this at $5 and I'm going to say 1,000 here. Now I'm going to go ahead and pick up a price ceiling. And here the price ceiling will be below the equilibrium price. So let's say $3. What happens then is we can no longer get to this quantity equilibrium of 1,000. That's what makes the market inefficient. Moreover, the quantity supplied is going to be here. Let's call that 500. and the quantity demanded is going to be in excess of quantity equilibrium. So let's say quantity demanded of 1,500. So in this case, we have a shortage which occurs in the market and a shortage of 1,000 units. So we see that sellers must ration the scarce goods, and it may lead to long lines, okay, discrimination according to sellers' bias. So one of the things that we see is the government is trying to do a noble thing here, and they're trying to not allow the price to be above a certain amount. Now, what kinds of things would they do this with? They do it for rent, because housing, we believe that everyone should have affordable housing. They might do it in terms of products or staples, food sources. Again, not allowing that price ceiling to go above it so everyone can afford it. The problem is that it creates this shortage in the market, and that becomes problematic for many. Here's a much nicer example. I don't know if the government would ever put a ceiling on ice cream cones, but let's say that they did. And we can see that in the first panel, because the price ceiling is above price equilibrium, it is non-binding. Our price equilibrium will be the price in the market, and our quantity equilibrium will be the quantity. However, when that price ceiling is below the price equilibrium here in panel B, we see that now the price will be $2, and we will have a shortage because this is the quantity supplied is going to be less than the quantity demanded. And make sure on test that you tell me that this is a shortage, and I need both answers. So shortage of 50 units, okay? I need both answers to get the full 10 points, okay? All right, so in 1979, the average retail price of gas was 86 cents. If we adjust for inflation, it becomes $3.26. Now, gas, let's think about that for a moment. What have we learned in the class about gas? We've learned that there are no close substitutes to gas, right? So this is pretty inelastic, particularly in the short run. Okay, what happened? Well, OPEC raised the price of crude oil, reduced the supply of gasoline, and long lines. What was responsible? OPEC and the shortage of gasoline, and the government stepped in and put a price ceiling on gas. Now, what have we just said? If that ceiling becomes binding, we're going to end up with a shortage. Long lines, price discrimination, and so on. Okay. So basically, what we look at is the equilibrium price was below the price ceiling, so it was non-binding. So that was okay, right? Not a big deal. But when the price of crude rose, then the equilibrium price was above the ceiling, and that's what caused a severe shortage. In gas lines, you would wait in line. I remember this in the 70s. You would wait in line 1 hour simply to get to that pump if they even had gas. So very difficult. These were repealed, obviously. So here's an example of that scenario. So in A, again, the price ceiling is up here in red, no effect on the market. However, when OPEC reduced the amount of oil from which gasoline is refined, then the price ceiling became binding, and we ended up with the shortage that you see here. Okay, that's the end of this learning objective, price ceilings, and we're going to come back in objective 2 and talk about price floors. Thanks.